record. All right, let me officially welcome you once again to the Stathead Football Webinar. My name is Jonah. As I said, I'm the social media manager for all of the sports reference sites, including Pro Football Reference. So every Sunday, you can see me on Twitter researching and posting interesting stats. And joining me is Katie Sharp, who is our customer success and social media associate for Stathead. And if you've never heard of Stathead, that's a set of like premium research tools that will allow you to go and dig really deep into the Pro Football Reference database and do more complicated research than just kind of answering questions like how many yards did Tom Brady have, or who won this game. You can really unlock our database to answer really complex and interesting questions. So that's what this whole presentation is really going to be about, answering questions. So we're getting through the kind of welcome and intro part now. Then I'm going to do a quick walkthrough of the kinds of data you can find on Pro Football Reference. I'm going to try to show you some stuff that's a little more off the beaten path. We'll take some questions about that, and then Katie will take over and walk you through Stathead and all the really crazy, powerful stuff you can do in there. We'll take more questions and then move on. Just want to mention, we'll bring this up again at the end, but I just wanted to let you know that because you're on the webinar today, you can get a discount on a annual subscription to Stathead. So you can get 20 bucks off. The offer lasts until Monday, so you have time to think it over and see what you like about this presentation, what you like about Stathead. But if you use the code football20, you'll get $20 off of an annual subscription to the football Stathead. If you also like basketball, hockey, baseball, obviously I'm repping two sports here today. You can get $20 off of the all sports option through Stathead 20. All right, so I'm gonna stop the share for 1 second so I can get out of the full screen. All right, so I'm going to get started now with the Pro Football Reference part of the presentation. If you have any questions while I'm doing this, or certainly like later on, just feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll get to them in a bit. So let me share my screen again. And this is a page that I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with. It is the Pro Football Reference homepage. So if you haven't been there for some reason, if you don't know what Pro Football Reference is, I'm not sure why you would be on this call if that's the case, but it's a huge website that lets you dig through a bunch of different football stats all throughout football history. We go all the way back to the very first year of the NFL, 1920, when it was the APFA, and all the way through to today. So I'm going to just kind of bounce around and show some interesting stuff that I like to use on the website. I'm going to start with some of our newer updates. So the first thing I want to mention is if you didn't see it during the off season, thanks to two researchers, and I'm going to go to the blog post about this. Thanks to the hard work of a pair of researchers, John Turney and Nick Webster, we updated our sack data over the offseason. Previously, the NFL didn't start calculating stats as a actual stat for sacks as an actual stat for defenses until 1982. Before that, you could get like the times the quarterback was sacked, but they didn't actually credit the defender who made the sack. So John Turney and Nick Webster spent 20 years going through old game film, old box scores, old write-ups of the game, just an incredible amount of research. And what they put together is a virtually full accounting of every sack from 1960 to 1982. So this is a truly remarkable update. And you can see now on our leaderboards page here, this is a sack. So if you want to see leaders, you can click up on this top menu for leaders. And then if you scroll down, you'll get a list of all of the stats. So passing, rushing, receiving, etc. But if you go down here to the bottom where we have sacks, we now have 2 leaderboards. Over here on the right, this is what the NFL still considers the sack leaderboard. Since 1982, the first year that sacks were like an official stat for defensive players. Over here is the new leaderboard that we can use Turney and Webster's research to build. So you can see Bruce Smith and Reggie White are still number 1 and 2, but Deacon Jones, who played mainly for the Rams from 1961 to 1974, he's now the number 3 all-time player in sacks. The guy with the 3rd most sacks since the creation of the AFL in 1960 did not appear on any leaderboard before this year, before the efforts of these researchers. So that's an extremely exciting thing to, football nerd, a stats nerd like me. The fact that we can now, learn a lot more about these guys who played maybe before, the Lawrence Taylor, the Kevin Greens, the 80s and 90s, the kind of sack guys who we knew, who we've heard about for years and years. There's this whole generation of players who I think maybe didn't get their due because we didn't have their sack data that now we do. So again, you can see the career leaderboard, and then you can click over here to single season. And once again, we have it split by unofficial and official. Al Baker had 23 sacks in 1978. And again, that doesn't appear in any, official leaderboard. So that's extremely cool. That was our big kind of like off-season update. And I couldn't be more excited about that. I'm not sure if you can tell. But I also want to take you through some of the kind of advanced stats we have for newer seasons. So if you hover over the season thing up here, and we'll just go to 2021, you'll see there's kind of a basic set of stats here. We got the standings, we got the playoff situation, which is always, really complicated to get correct every year. We've got kind of team stats, but then up here on this gray bar, you'll see there's a lot more places you can go menu-wise. So if you hover over player stats, you'll see these kind of standard ones that we have for going back years and years. And these are all the basics. Here for the quarterbacks, you can see passing yards and touchdowns. You can go to rushing and see rushing yards. But the thing I want to show you are these advanced stats. If you click on advanced passing, we'll start there. You'll see kind of a similar looking table with 4 different tabs. And these tabs split off the different kinds of advanced passing stats we have. So we have air yards. So you can see intended air yards and completed air yards. You can get it on a per attempt basis if you want. And you can also see yards after the catch. So you can see kind of what quarterbacks maybe are getting the most help from playmakers, what quarterbacks are bombing it down the field the most. And on top of that, you'll notice that this box up here is checked. So it's filtering out non-qualifiers. So we're only getting the people who are actually qualifying for these rate stats and not, guys who threw one trick play or something. So that's air yards. We also have accuracy. So you can see how many times they threw it away, who had the most passes dropped, who had the most bad throws, who had the most throws on target. So that's really good, like quarterback accuracy type stuff. We also have pressure data, so you can see who's getting pressured the most and who's getting pressured the least. And lastly, we have data on RPOs and play action. So you can see, who's getting the most yards on RPOs. No surprise, Jalen Hurts, who's running the most play action, and stuff like that. So that's advanced passing. We have a lot of advanced data for running backs and receivers too. So we have yards before and after contact, broken tackles. We'll have all that for receivers, but we also have average depth of target, drops, and then you can actually see the passer rating of the receiver when they're targeted by their quarterback, which I think is pretty interesting. So you can see who's been the most and least effective as maybe a tandem them with their quarterback. And then we also have some really cool defensive stats. So for pass coverage, you can actually see all of the passing stats that defenders give up when they're targeted in the passing game. So you can see maybe who has the best passer rating when a quarterback targets them and who has the worst. You can see who got targeted the most times, who's giving up the highest completion rate, stuff like that. Even like air yards, yards after the catch. Then for the pass rush, you can see like the times that the amount of times someone blitzed, quarterback hurries, knockdowns. We do have quarterback hits as well. That's just on the main defensive page, not the advanced one. And our data on that one goes further back. But then you can see pressures and missed tackles and all of that stuff. So we've got all of those kind of advanced player stats. We also have those same stats on a team level. So if a team has multiple quarterbacks, or you want to see, how the team defense is doing at pressure rate or air yards or stuff like that, you can do all of that. So those are our advanced stats. They go back to 2018. So we have 3 or 4 years worth of data. And the other thing I want to show you is here on the player page. If you go hover over game logs, you'll see, so for Tom Brady, if we go to 2021, you'll see this is like his basic game logs for like, game by game. What did he do in every single game this season with basic stats, yards, touchdowns, stuff like that. But we also have advanced game logs for those 4 years that we have advanced data. So you can see game by game how many air yards he was attempting, bad throws, stuff like that. So you can look and see maybe some games, like in this game against the Eagles, there were fewer air yards. So maybe the game plan was to throw shorter, quick passing games, stuff like that. Whereas in this game against the Dolphins, he had far more intended air yards per attempt. So maybe the game plan was different. That was more of a deep passing type game plan. So you can see all that stuff on the player page. I'll also take you briefly here to the splits. These are stats that are split off by like categories. So you can see stats in a win versus a loss. You can see by margin, month, on the day, the time, division, opponent. And then we have for years where we have play-by-play data, which starts in 1994, we have these advanced splits, which show you breakdowns by down, yards to go, down and yards to go, field position, quarter, game situation, even stuff like no huddle and shotgun versus under center, play action versus non-play action. This stuff, these last three are really cool. Play action versus non-play action, RPO, and time in the pocket. Those are only since 2018, since that uses the advanced stats data. But these other ones, quarter, field position, all of that, that goes back to 1994. So you can see Tom Brady's entire career, how he did on third down or how he did in the fourth quarter, stuff like that. So that is that. I want to go over a couple of other things that maybe are relevant to fantasy football players. I know that I use this site a ton in my fantasy playing. So I'm sure I'm not the only one. So if you want to access the fantasy stats, the best thing you can do is scroll all the way down here to the bottom of any page. You'll see this footer, and it has this full site menu. And one of the sections down here is fantasy football stats. So if you click on that, you'll see we've got this kind of basic, like the top fantasy players this year. We've got this section, which is cool. This is called fantasy breakout players. It's people who had the most fantasy points last week that are owned in, I think under 50% is where we put the cutoff. But you can kind of see, so if you're looking for good waiver wire targets, it's obviously, mainly going to be quarterbacks. We also got, Boston Scott, Cooper Rush is a quarterback, but Cedric Wilson is a wide receiver. Ty Johnson, I know he was a hot waiver wire pickup this week. I did not get him. I missed out. But you can kind of get some ideas of who to target there. Then you can see, so in addition to kind of these, like, in every player, we have fantasy stats. You can see how many fantasy points they're averaging, how many points per game. We also do DraftKings and FanDuel if you're into the daily fantasy. But in addition to that, if you go down to this section that's fantasy points allowed, you can see how defenses have fared against fantasy positions this season. So right now we're looking at the running back position, and you can see that the Jets have given up the most points to running backs this season. They've given up 28.7 points per game to running backs. The Lions second, Chargers third. Everyone knows they're struggling with the run. Bills have the best defense. So you can look at this and look at your team and be like, I have a guy who's facing the Bills this week. Maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe I shouldn't start that guy. Whereas I have another guy who I don't usually start, but he's playing the Lions. That's a great matchup. I'll put him in the lineup. And you can see one thing that I like is they have the passing split by tight end and wide receiver. So you can see which teams are better or worse against tight ends versus which teams are better or worse against wide receivers. And that actually has, even if you don't play fantasy, just interesting implications if you're trying to figure out what a team's game plan might be, or, handicap, where a team might have an advantage going into a matchup. You can see, they have good tight ends. And even though this team has a stout passing defense, they've been giving up a lot of yardage and scores to tight ends. So that matchup page is very cool. And then if you go over to, if you go back to the main fantasy page, you can put that matchup data together with the player data in this fantasy matchup section. So if we go over here to running backs, this is actually combining how many fantasy points the player is averaging with their matchup this week to give kind of a rough suggested ranking of how this week may go. So you can see Jonathan Taylor averaging 16.4 fantasy points. That's second most per game of the running backs who are active this week. And he's facing the Jets, who are the 32nd defense in points allowed to running backs. So that's a really great matchup, great combination of player matchup. Number one, you might not necessarily need us to tell you to start Jonathan Taylor, but as you scroll down, as you get into kind of the trickier, should I start, Booker or Hubbard this week? Should I be starting Pollard, even though he's a kind of second string, situational guy? As you're facing these kind of tough, starter sit matchups, this table will, I think, help you kind of navigate situations like that. And then the last thing is that I wanted to point out from our fantasy data is that we have these red zone stats. So if you want to see maybe who's getting the most touches in the red zone, who's getting the most touches inside the 10, who's getting the most touches inside the 5, all of that stuff is obviously hugely important for fantasy purposes to know, sure, someone's getting a ton of handoffs in general, but are they getting the ball close to the goal line in a situation where they can score touchdowns? So that is useful on there. I'll just show you a couple more things and then we can move on to questions. So a lot of this other stuff is self-explanatory. We obviously have team defensive stats and player defensive stats. You can go to any week and see kind of the full listing of who's playing, all the top players, all of that stuff. But I want to hover over this other section because there's a lot of stuff on here that maybe people aren't quite as aware of or don't know. So in addition to the advanced stats, which I went over, for a while, we have salary data. That page did not work. We do have salary data, I promise. We'll have to get that sorted out. We also have really cool penalty data. I guess I guess the words cool and penalty maybe don't go together too often. We have extensive penalty data, so you can see what penalties are getting called this year, and kind of how many per game, how many yards per game. You can go back to last year and compare them. So holding was down last year, now it's up this year. You can go to the O-line penalties and actually see which offensive linemen are getting called the most for holding and false start. Let's see. You can see all the players who debuted this year and their stats. We've got attendance data broken down by game, as well as the total for every team. So the Panthers, #1 in attendance. And then for those of you who are interested in kind of the gambling side of football, we have a pretty good odds data, both for this year and historic. So on here, you can see preseason Super Bowl odds and the over-unders for win totals. If you go to a previous year, you'll be able to see if they actually hit or not, and kind of like compare all of that. And then if you go into the box score, we have here it is. We have both the spread and the over-under. And we have that historic spread and over-under data all the way back to 1978. So you can actually do some pretty interesting research on, how underdogs have fared, how overs and unders work. We'll get into that. I'm not sure if we'll get it. You can do that stuff in Stathead. So that is cool. And then, I'll just show you, we got this draft section. We have the full history of the draft all the way back to 1936. So that's cool. And every year we do a draft preview where you can see kind of the breakdown of like, the draft trade value chart. You can see the breakdown of what teams can expect drafting at a certain position. We also have combine data back to 2000, so you can find your historic comps for guys. And then the last thing I'm just going to show you is if you scroll down to the Frivolities section, there's all kind of this like fun random stuff. So you can see like the last undefeated team in every season. You can see quarterback wins versus every franchise. So who's beaten all 32 teams. And then of course we've got like people who threw a pass who weren't quarterbacks. So all the trick plays, all the linemen who scored touchdowns, all kinds of fun stuff like that. And of course, speaking of fun stuff, if you go over to this scores page and you go to search scores, you can find, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Scoregami, but if you want to see if a score has never occurred before, you can just type it into the box and search to find every single game that finished with that final score. So here, if you were watching a game that finished 22-18, you'd be like, all right, that's the first time that score's ever been achieved. So that's just a brief surface level overview. I can go way more into, the stuff you can find on the player pages, the stuff you can find on the team pages. But I want to make sure that we have time to go over all the stuff you can do in Stathead. So let's go ahead and move into questions. So if you have any questions about any of the stuff I've been saying, feel free to drop it in the chat, and then we'll start going through it. All right. Well, I'll scroll through here and try to find some questions. Unless Katie, I'm not sure if you were keeping an eye on it and flag some that might be worth asking, but otherwise I'll just kind of dig through here.
Hey, Jonah, I have a question.
Yeah, sure. But do you mind just dropping it in the chat, just to keep things a little organized? I don't want like 10 people shouting at once.
Okay.
Sorry, Dave. So let's see. I saw a question about whether we have moneyline information, kind of more information about the odds. So we don't have moneyline, and it's just spread and total. And as far as the it's when the game closes. Let's see. How do you look up single game records? That's a great question. So Scott asked, how do you look up single game records? Like what 49er holds the record for most touchdown runs in a single game. So if you want to see league-wide single game records, you can do that by clicking on this leaders tab and scrolling down here, and you'll see there's this column on the leaders tab for single game. So if you click on that, it'll show you the single game leader and a link to the box score where they set that record. If you want to break it down by team, you're going to need Stathead for that. And Katie will go into that during her part of the presentation, but I do just want to briefly show, we do have these team pages. You can see the franchise history here. So retired numbers, top players, and leaders, career and single season leaders, stuff like that. We also have, which is cool, or I guess not cool, depending on your perspective, comebacks and blown leads. So you can see the team's biggest comeback and the biggest blown lead in team history. Rob asked if we'd send out the recording, which yes, we will. And yeah, I think that's probably good for now. We'll take more. Here's a good one. So Dave asked that, Dave's question was that I mentioned play-by-play data goes back to 1994. Will play-by-play data be available before 1994? And the answer to that question is we would love to add more play-by-play data. We're constantly looking for more data to add. It's just a matter of finding a reliable digitized source for that data that we can use for the site. So we're always looking for stuff like that. And hopefully in the years to come, play-by-play data especially always tends to get deeper back. I think when I started here, it was like 1997. So just kind of slowly over time, people are adding more. It's the same with the basketball and baseball play-by-play data. It takes people a while to like find and collect and go through it all, but it's always gradually getting more and more complete. So hopefully in the years to come, it'll go further back. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Katie and let her tell you about all of the stuff you can do with this data in Stathead. So Katie, whenever you're ready.
All right. Hello guys. How are you doing? Thanks for all your questions so far. It's been great. So what I am going to do right now is I'm just going to go through Stathead. And obviously, if any of you guys have used Stathead before, some of the stuff I say at the beginning may be a little bit redundant, but I really just want to give like a basic overview to get everybody up to speed, maybe who hasn't used it before and maybe wants to try it out. So we'll be going over some of the more basic stuff, and then at the end we'll kind of get into some of the more advanced tools and the nitty gritty, and where you can really dig into the play-by-play data. So what I want to do is I just want to start off by saying, like, basically set it like what is Stathead and like how do you do a search? And the good thing about Stathead is that all of the search tools are very similar. So they're going to look similar and they're going to function similarly in terms of the way that you set filters and parameters and everything like that. So the way I like to explain it is, the first thing when you're trying to do a Stathead search is you just got to pick your question. You got to figure out what you want to ask, and then you go from where you start with the question. And once you have your question, then you're going to choose the different finders, and we got a bunch of different finders. Finders is what we call the search tools, and there's for games, there's for players, there's for teams, there's for seasons, play-by-play stuff. I'll be showing you that in just a minute. And then so actually, why don't I start sharing my screen, and we'll go to we'll just kind of give an example there. And hold on, get this started. All right, so share that. All right, cool. Can you guys see everything all right? Hopefully you guys can see the screen and everything. So this is cool. Thanks, Jonah. All right, this is actually the main Stathead screen. We're going to go to the football one. So this is where you guys are going to start off basically all of your searches. It's stathead.com/football. And this is where we have all of the different tools and finders and stuff. And so, well, as I was saying, you pick your question, and then you're going to choose your finder. So you're like, okay, well, what do I want to look up? So that would depend on what your finder is going to be. And then we'll start off with probably the most basic one, which is the player season finder here. And like I said, a lot of these are going to be set up similar. So A lot of what you learn here can be applied to all the other different stuff, all the other different finders. So at the top is basically kind of where you determine what kind of question are you going to be asking. Are you looking for like a single season or a single game? Are you looking for multiple games or multiple seasons or careers? And so these radio buttons up here is where you're going to set that parameter. And it's the same basically for all the different ones we'll go through. Over on the left side is where you're going to find all of your criteria, your filters. And so this is really where you say, okay, this is my question. So like basically once you've decided I want to look up single seasons or single games or something like that, now what kind of questions do you want to ask? Do you want to look up what different stats? You can sort by different stats. And then here is where you're going to find the different filters. And these are usually grouped the same way. There's statistical filters, pretty self-explanatory, biographical filters, age, college, position, as you can see, and status filters, which is, active players, Hall of Famers, rookies, things like that. We also have draft filters for the season ones, but that's just very specific for this finder. So I'm not going to really get into that. So once you figure out what your filters are going to be, it's really easy. You can use as many as you want. It's unlimited pretty much. You can use 1,000 if you want, but that would be pretty boring. And then you can basically then all you do is you click get results, and your results show up in this results table over here. So it's really simple. And all of these columns are sortable as well in the results table. All right, so that is kind of just the basic, really like 30,000 foot view of how you do a search. So let's just start off with the season finder and kind of show you some of the different things that you can do with the season finder, because this is probably one of the most basic ones. So as I said before, up at the top here, you can look for single seasons, matching some of your criteria here. This second one will let you combine seasons. So maybe it's like the last 5 seasons, and also careers. So if you just basically set it for so all time. And then this third one, what it does is it lets you look up seasons matching the criteria. So like the example that I like, maybe like most 5,000 yard seasons, passing yard seasons. So let's use that as our example. So I'm going to look up who has the most 5,000 yard passing seasons in NFL history. And the cool thing about this season finder is that we do have it going back to 1920 for most stats that are available. Obviously not like QB hits or anything sacks or anything like that. That's a little bit more modern. But for any stat that is, pretty much all time, we have that going back at the season level. So we got our, we know that we're going to choose this button right here because we're trying to group seasons, and it's going to be descending, obviously. Right down here is where we're going to choose statistical filters. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to passing yards here, set that greater than or equal to 5,000. And then it's as simple as going like this, clicking get results. And we have our answer here. Obviously, Drew Brees with 5. No one else has more than 1. This is pretty amazing. One of the more interesting ones that I like to use as an example. So that's kind of the gist of the player season finder. Really simple. Just lets you look up, all the stats that we have at the season level, and you can see all the different stats that we have here in the statistical filters. It's passing, and they're grouped also, passing, rushing, receiving, some fantasy stats, and then we get into some of the more deep defensive and adjusted stats down there. The next one that I want to talk about here is the player game finder. This is another really popular one that you're going to use a lot. And I'll go through some of the stuff here at the top. So obviously this is where you're going to find those single game performances like we talked about, who has the most. I think someone in the chat left something about the most rushing TDs in a game by a San Francisco 49ers player. You would use this option up here. This second option here is pretty interesting. The second and third ones, in that basically it kind of acts like a season finder because you're looking up cumulative stats over a certain number of games. but it's at the game level. So you can really like home into like like who has the most rushes in the first 8 games of a season. This is something I'll use that as an example, something relevant to what happened this past weekend. And so what you would do is you'd use this radio button here. So we're looking up the most rushes in the first 8 games of a season. This is team games, right? So we're gonna sort by rushing attempts. And we actually only have, at the game level, we only have data going back to 1950, so it's not all time. So that's really important to remember. But we're just going to use, so 1950 is going to be our cutoff there. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into game filters here. And in game filters is where you can set the game number. So that's right here. So this is for the team, remember. We don't have it for players, it's just the team. So we would do from 1 to 8, and we click get results. And we're working. And here's the answer. And I see if you guys have maybe have seen this bouncing around on Twitter that Derrick Henry, yep, this year he had his 219 attempts were the most for any player in the first 8 games of a season. So something to think about with his injury. But anyways, we'll get back to showing you some more things here. So I really like this one because what it does is it lets you kind of you can kind of acts like a season finder, but it's at the game level. So if you wanted to set really, set different filters here, like we talked about game filter, the game number, you can set the game day. So like who has the most passing yards in a season on Mondays, Monday Night Football, whatever, at the time. And then you can also set years and everything like that. So it's a pretty cool tool right there. And the same thing here, this third one is the same thing as this second one over here, except it goes over multiple seasons. These bottom ones up here, it basically allows you to look up games matching a certain number of criteria. So an example would be to look up like the most games in a career with 200 rushing yards. So we would actually use this one right here because this is the careers one. So what we're going to do, so we're looking up most games with at least 200 rushing yards. Like I said, going back to 1950, all we got to do is we just remove our filter from before. And now we're going to go into statistical filters and go to rushing yards, set that equal to 200, greater than or equal to 200. And we're looking up games with at least 200 rushing yards in a career. And as the answer is Adrian Peterson and O.J. Simpson tied with 6 right there. And that's going back to 1950. So that I think pretty much explains the player game finder. Like I said, this is one you're going to be using a lot. There's a lot of different things you can do. This is also where you can look up, like there's a lot of stats going around with Mike White and Cooper Rush, their performances last week in their first career starts. So this is where you would look that up. We have this filter for QB career start number. And so if you're looking for your first career start at QB, it's as easy as putting in first starter 1 and 1 right there. And obviously we saw before you would go to single games right here and match that. And we saw before that Mike White, I believe it was, had the most passes completed in any first start so there we go. Mike White with his 37 completions were the most for any QB in his first career start. So this is a really powerful. I could probably, be going for like a half an hour using the player game finder. But we're going to move on to some of the other more basic ones. So let's start off here. This one is a pretty popular one, this player streak finder. I'm going to just really go quickly through this. It's pretty self-explanatory. Just looking up consecutive games. You can also look up consecutive seasons matching the criteria. Like I said, the criteria is going to be very similar to what you saw in the other finders. The important thing that I want to mention here is that you're basically mostly going to be using this purple box here, streak stat events, to set your filters. So if you want to look up the most consecutive games with at least 300 passing yards, you're going to look it up here. This box right here is a little bit more complicated. It's if you want to do like multiple overlapping streaks with multiple criteria, you would use this box as well. But I'm not really going to get into that because that can get a little bit confusing. So the important thing to know about the streak finder is that you're going to want to just focus on this purple box right here when you're setting your filters. And the next one I'll go to really quickly is going to be the split finder for players. And we just added this last year, so in the middle of the season. So we don't have a ton of splits, but what you can do is, it's like I said before, look up single season. We only have it at the season level as well. Good to know. Single seasons and then combined seasons, careers, and then just show you the splits we have. So we have like quarter, location, like home road, the number down, field position. That would include like red zone stuff, score differential. So you can look up, how much, whether they're leading, tying, trailing. It doesn't have exactly, like, you can't set the specific score here, but you can just kind of look up. It's important to, like, who's got the most, passing yards when they're, leading in the fourth quarter or something like that, or tied in the fourth quarter. Things like that you can look up. We do have some snap and huddle. So this is shotgun, under center, huddle, no huddle. And then we have this is blitzing and non-blitzing stats here. So you can look up how, some very basic, I would maybe call them sort of advanced stats, but not as extensive as what we have on Pro Football Reference. But as I mentioned in the chat, we are hoping to add some of those advanced stats to Stathead in the future. So just look out for that. I can't promise anything, but that's definitely on our radar. So that's the split finder. Like I said, and also I just wanted to mention that it only goes back to 1994 because it is looking up stuff at the play-by-play level. As Jonah mentioned, we only have that going back to 1994. And then another popular one that I want to show you guys here is the player comparison tool. This is, where you settle those debates in the bar, or with your friends on the couch or whatever. And it's really simple. You can compare up to 6 players. You just type in their name here. So we can do something like Joe Montana, and we could do, Tom Brady. Obviously, we love this comparison. And what you can do is you can look up their entire careers. You can look up just single seasons, like how they did in their first season, in their 10th season or whatever. And you can compare it that way. You can also compare groups of seasons. So you can look up their first, maybe you want to just look up their first to their 5th seasons, how they did. Something like that. And then what it does is it just spits out a nice, really comparison here, side by side, or top and bottom, totals per game, and also playoffs totals and per game stats. We don't have any of the advanced stats, obviously, here, but we do have all of the basic stats that you could want to compare them. All right, so those are what I kind of consider to be the most popular and the most basic finders. Obviously, for the teams, we have the team game finder, which is very similar to the player game finder, and the team streak finders. And so I'm not going to really go through those, but just know that you can basically all the same filters that you could get with the players, you can get with the team game finder and the team streak finders. So some of the ones that I want to go through now pretty kind of quickly, but spend a little bit of time on are the ones that are specific to football. And the one that I find that is most popular and most powerful, obviously, is this gameplay finder. And this is basically, if you want to play like Monday morning quarterback or armchair quarterback, whatever you want to call it, you can really dig into the play-by-play of every single game going back to 1994, and just really scrutinize every single thing. This is like basically where you can find, if you're trying to look up any play, like you can find it here. So what we do, I just kind of want to go over what everything means here. At the top here, this is a little bit confusing, but what it does is there's 3 different options. I usually just choose this third option here because it gives you everything that you see on the screen. If you wanted to just look up the plays, you would choose this one, and it would only give you here. It would only give you this playlist here at the bottom. As you can see, it's very long. That playlist. So if you choose that one, if you choose this one, it doesn't give you the playlist. It just gives you combined stats. So I like to just choose this one right here. Gives you everything. Let's clear that again. So what it has up here is these are summary tables up at the top. So this summarizes all the plays by down. This summarizes all the plays by how many yards to go on the play. And then these are the team offense totals. The default here is Kansas City, the Chiefs. I'm not sure why, but and then the team defense totals. And then these are the player totals on offense in this table right here, and then player totals for special teams. This mostly applies when there's a field goal is one of the plays that you're looking at, and then defense totals for players. And then, as I mentioned here, the individual, there's a listing of every single play here with a maximum of 500 rows that you can look up. Another thing I want to mention here is that you can actually look up a specific player. So this is if you wanted to just look up all of Tom Brady's plays, you would enter his player here. You can start typing and then it will appear right there. So you could look up all of just his plays. Get rid of that. So one thing that I kind of want to mention, this is one of the tricks, is that you can use the play finder. And so I'll show you some of the play filters here. This is kind of the new stuff that you would learn. So basically it's everything. It's quarters, time remaining down, blah, 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 blah. You can see everything here. The different types, the scoring margin, we have rush and pass, rush directions and pass locations. So that's if you wanted to look up deep passes or short passes. And then rush direction is obviously the left, right, or center over the different positions. One little cool trick that I want to show you with the play finder is this is where you can look up comebacks by teams. So we see how many wins does a team have when, let's say, trailing by 10 points this season, at least 10 points at any point this season in the game. So this is how you would do that. This is kind of one of the more popular things we always get questions about, teams overcoming deficits and everything. So what we're going to do is we're going to just set it to this season. And what we're going to use the play filters here. So the first one that we're going to do is, well, actually, let's go into game filters. We're going to do that first. We're going to go to game results because obviously this team is overcoming a deficit of 10 points, so they won the game. And we're going to go into play filters. And we're going to go to scoring margin here. So this is where you can actually set the scoring margin. And what it's looking at is the scoring margin at the time of the play. It's very specific. So we're going to do between, I always just do 99, negative 99, and negative 10. So this is looking at any plays that were done when a team was trailing by at least 10 points. And then it's as easy as clicking get results here. And so now we've got our tables, and the important table that you want to look up is we're going to look up in this team offense table, and we're going to look up the number of games. So this is the number of games won when a team was trailing by at least 10 points, right? Because they had a play on offense when they were trailing by at least 10 points. And so we can see here, 3 teams here have done that twice this season. The Raiders, the Titans, and the Ravens. So that's just a cool little trick that I like to use that not many people might know about, but you can use with the play finder. May not be as obvious as some of the other things. And I think somebody mentioned about game tying or game winning field goals. So that's something that you can do as well. And what it would do, it would just be involved. You want to make sure that score filter is set for yes. The score type you can set. So we would set that as a field goal. Then you would have to set the scoring margin for game tying. It would have to be obviously between -3 and -3 right there. And then you would click, I'm not going to click that, it might take a little while, but you would get all of the field goals that tied the game, because obviously 3 points, team was down by 3 points. And then they would show up in that special teams table right here. So that's the play finder, the gameplay finder. As I said, I could probably do an entire hour-long webinar on the play finder. But as it is with all of these different finders, the best thing to do is to just experiment and to just try it out and trial and error, just kind of play around with it when you have some free time and you want to do your research. Just a couple more that I want to show you really quickly as we're winding down here that I think are pretty important. This drive finder acts very similar to the play finder. I'm not going to go through it in as much detail, but what it does is it lets you kind of just look up different drives for teams, and this only goes back to 2000. So we have these are summary stats. So if you're kind of looking at a more macro level, you can look up different drives and how they did, and then you have them by team, grouped by team here on offense, grouped by team on defense, and then every single drive where you set your criteria would be listed here with a link to go to the drive, with all the details of the drive and the different drive filters. It's pretty self-explanatory. The number, actually that's the drive number, so that's like the 5th or 6th drive of the game, starting, scoring margin, things like that, and then you can sort by plays, penalty, first downs, anything, yards and stuff like that, drive time. So this is the drive finder. Acts pretty similarly to the gameplay finder, in that you're getting a lot of details, but obviously at the drive level. Another interesting one that people use more often in the beginning of the season is this team record finder. And what this does is it basically lets you look through all the seasons since 1920 for teams starting with a specific record. So it's not like 7-1 or better, or 2-5 or worse, or something like that. It's actually how many times did they start exactly 2-5 or exactly 7-1. But what I like to do with this is usually look up teams like the Cardinals that started 7-0 and how they actually fared the rest of the season. So that's the cool thing. So if we wanted to look up all teams starting 7-0 in the Super Bowl era, you would set it from 1966 to 2021. Start with 7 wins, 0 losses, 0 ties, and then click get results. And what it does is there's this really cool, it summarizes all the teams here at the top, looks up their average finish, how many made the playoffs, 100%, that's good to know. And then this is league champions, 10 of them. So of the 40, 10 actually either, and in this case, it is league champions refers to Super Bowl because we set it for the Super Bowl era. And then you have all of the listings of all the teams, the 40 teams and their playoff result. So it's kind of cool. You can sort by playoff results. So you can see ones that actually like made the Super Bowl. And then here are the ones that won. And here are the ones that, some teams actually, lost in wild card or whatever. So you can you really dig into like, what does it mean for the Cardinals starting 7-0, that type of thing. And the two last ones that I want to talk about are pretty simple. It's the player touchdown finder, which basically just you can look up every single touchdown that's ever been scored in the history of the NFL. So going back to 1920, and you can set it by different criteria down here. The type of distance, the distance, the quarter that the touchdown was scored, and the different types of touchdowns. So this is a fun one, and you can find out, as I mentioned up here, single touchdowns or how many touchdowns did they have in that game or in a season or whatnot. And then the final one, another really specific one, but pretty cool, was the player field goal finder. So this lets you look up specific field goals going back to 1960. And the caveat here is that you can only kind of sort by either date or distance. And there's some very just limited filters. Here is distance and was it good or was it blocked? So unfortunately, we don't have like, game tying or game winning filters here. But this just basically lets you look up, you can look up the longest field goals since 1960 or, how many players had blocked field goals or something like that in a season. So I think that's pretty much all the finders. The one last thing that I do want to mention is the fact that all of this data is downloadable and exportable to either Excel or a CSV file, and it's really simple. So this basically, if you can't find, if maybe like exactly what you couldn't find exactly what you wanted, but you know that if you've got the raw data, you can do some calculations, maybe you're doing spreadsheets or databases or whatnot. This is gonna be really important. So you just hover your mouse over that export data link right there, and then you're gonna get that as Excel. That will download it directly to Excel. So you can see here, it goes right there. Or if you want to, if you have used some other, different spreadsheet program, you can get it as a CSV and then just copy and paste the entire table. The thing I will note is that it only lets you download what you see on the page. So if there's more than usually 100 results, you can only download 100 results at a time. So that's one of the limiting factors. But still, it's a really powerful tool. And then the other thing I wanted to show you is this share results button up here. What you do if you click this, it gives you a link that you can share with anybody. So even if a person doesn't have Stathead, you can still send them this link, and they'll be able to look up the results. So that's pretty cool. Like if you're sharing something, you're with your friends, you can text them or share on Twitter or put into, if you're writing blog posts or something like that, put into an article. You can just generate this, what we call tiny URL, just by clicking this button, and it's on every page. It's for every search that you do. And you copy that and then just embed that into whatever you want. All right, so I think that's it. Maybe we have some time for a couple questions if Jonah didn't get to some in the chat. But thank you guys for listening.
Yeah, let's do a couple questions. It's 1:02 now, so if you have to jump off, that's totally fine. We'll send around, or if you came in late, either way, we're going to send a email around with the full presentation. There's a couple of stuff that I thought it might be worth just walking people through. So Katie, we got a question about searching like pro stats by the college they went to, and I know there are some college filters in the season finder. So I was wondering if you could just briefly take us through those.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. I'll share my screen again. All right, cool. Yeah, we're on the season finder, so that's pretty cool. So yeah, so in the biographical filters is where you're going to find what college you can look up by what college. So you can only, unfortunately, we don't have conferences in here, but you can look up by college. So if you wanted to look up, Alabama, who's got the most passing yards in a single season for an Alabama quarterback, that is where you would do something like that. So it's in the so you would look up, it's in the biographical filters.
That's awesome. I was also wondering if you could show us the tackle filters. There was a question about that, like how far back does the tackle data go? What kinds of tackles do we have?
Yeah, sure. So we'll stick with the season finder, and we actually have tackles. It's different because we have solo and we have assisted tackles. So we'll go into statistical filters, and the defensive stats is below the offensive stats. So it's going to be right here. So we got sacks. So then we have this tackle section here. So we have the solo tackles going back to 94 and the assists back there. The combined tackles. So that's going back to 1987. So that's a little bit different. They calculated it from 1987 to 1993. It's calculated a little bit differently. And then we have tackles for loss since 99, and then QB hits since 2006. As you mentioned, we have the sacks going back to 1960, thanks to the extraordinary work of those researchers recently.
Yeah, all that is really good. I think those are all the questions we had. But if you don't mind me taking over the screen sharing.
Yeah. Oh, let me stop that right there. There you go.
Cool. Let me just get this. So we're gonna send you guys off in a few moments here, but first let me just come back here and just explain kind of what happens next. So let me get the full screen presentation up. There we go. So what's next is you create your Stathead account, and then you get a sign up for the discount that'll get you $20 off. I forgot to change the copy on that slide. And then you enjoy Stathead. I just want to let me go over here again to the discount code. So if you want to save $20 on the Stathead discount, you have from today till Monday. You can use the code football to get $20 off of one sport, or Stathead 20 to get $20 off of the all sport. So if you want to do basketball, hockey, baseball, we have all sorts of tools. Some of them are very similar to the ones Katie showed you. Some of them are different. We have basketball. You can look for lineup data and plus minus. Hockey, you've got like a touchdown finder, but for goals. Baseball, obviously, we've got a really extensive play-by-play that you can search similarly to the game finder. All of that stuff at your fingertips, Stathead 20. Or if you just want to, crush fantasy football, handicap the games, do your football research, football 20 is the code for that. There were a lot of really great suggestions and questions in the chat. And I really wanted to thank you all for participating and doing that. But as you use the site, I'm sure you'll think of more stuff may come up. There'll be more filters that you'd like to see or more kind of search options. So if any of that stuff comes up, feel free to contact us. You can hit us up on social media. We're on Twitter at Stathead or at PFRef. That's the football account and the Stathead account. Football Reference is on Instagram at Pro Football Reference, all one word. And then we're on Facebook as well at Stathead and at pro.football.reference. So if you're on any of those social media accounts, you can hit us up. You can also contact us on any Stathead page. There's like a little contact us form in the bottom right hand corner of the page. And if you just click on that, you'll send us an email and Katie will get back to you soon. So if you have any questions or suggestions for new tools or anything like that, feel free to let us know. Katie, is there anything else I'm forgetting or?
I I think nah, I think we covered it. I mean, all I can say is there's a ton of stuff to learn with Stathead. I suggest, going through this webinar you want again, we'll be sending out the link to the recording. And as Jonah mentioned, with Stathead, you can always just email us, send us a DM on Twitter, and I'll be getting back to you. And I'd love to help out anybody who has questions on how to use stuff and to find stats and to find answers to their questions.
So we'll send a email out with a link to this to the video recording of this webinar, so you can refer back to it as you're using Stathead. And we'll also be sure to include the discount code once again in that email, and all the links you'll need to sign up and get the discount and give Stathead a go. So thank you again so much for stopping by, spending an hour with us, dropping your great questions and comments in the chat, and hopefully we'll see you around soon. Thanks so much.